I'll never forget the sound of metal rattling against my porch that morning, the kind of sound that makes your stomach drop before your eyes even understand what's happening. I dropped my grocery bags, eggs exploding across the driveway, and there she was, my mother, a disabled veteran chained like a criminal to the railing of her own home. Her wheelchair had been shoved out of reach. Standing over her smug and smiling behind designer sunglasses was Karen Aldridge, the self-proclaimed queen of our HOA. In her hand dangled bolt cutters, and on her lips was some absurd line about violating Code 47B. My blood turned to ice. This wasn't just a petty neighbor dispute. This was imprisonment, humiliation, and an abuse of power so grotesque it made me shake with rage. I freed my mother, but I had no idea that moment would ignite a war far bigger than our porch, one that would drag the FBI hidden financial schemes in an entire neighborhood into the light. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is right now. The moment I unclipped the last shackle and helped my mother back into her chair, the adrenaline still hammered through my chest like a war drum. I could see the red marks where the chain had dug into her fragile skin, swollen lines crossing her wrists like cruel reminders of what had just happened. My mother, Ruth Hale, was no stranger to pain. 20 years in the Army had taught her more than most people would ever know, but this was different. This wasn't an injury sustained on the battlefield. This was humiliation inflicted at home on our porch in front of anyone who cared to look. And it was done by someone who lived less than 100 yards away. Karen Aldridge leaned casually against the railing as though she had every right to be there. "Rules are rules," she said, twirling the bolt cutters as if they were some kind of accessory. Her voice dripped with authority she hadn't earned, only seized. Section 47B is clear. Disabled residents can't be left outside unsupervised for more than 15 minutes. You'd know that if you bothered to read the contract. I wanted to rip the smugness from her face. "Contract," I shot back. "What contract gives you the authority to chain a veteran to her own damn house? That's not enforcement, that's assault." She smiled as if the word thrilled her. "The HOA board gave me enforcement power. If you don't like it, call the police. I'm sure Officer Dyer will be happy to remind you that he's my cousin." The name landed like a brick. Of course she had the police in her pocket. That explained why every neighbor who dared to resist had suddenly stopped speaking up. I clenched my fists, my knuckles pale against my skin. I wanted to dial 911 right then, but a creeping dread whispered that it wouldn't matter. Instead, I pulled out my phone and began recording. I filmed the marks on my mother's wrists, the way her wheelchair had been shoved halfway down the porch, the bolt cutters still dangling from Karen's hand. My mother's voice cracked as she whispered, "Marcus, don't make this worse." But she didn't understand it was already worse. Karen leaned in close enough for me to smell her perfume. "File all the complaints you want. I've documented every one of your violations. By the time I'm through, you'll be buried under fines you'll never pay off." And with that, she turned and walked away, heels clicking on the pavement like the sound of a gavel sentencing us to something bigger than I could yet imagine. Inside, I wrapped a blanket around Mom and made her tea. She tried to steady her shaking hands as she lifted the cup, but I could see the tremor that wasn't just physical, it was fear. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't want you dragged into this." "Dragged into this," I snapped, though not at her. "They chained you like an animal, Mom. This isn't a violation. This is criminal." She looked away, her eyes glassy. "It started weeks ago. First, it was complaints about Max barking, even though he only barks when I need help. Then they fined me because the ramp wasn't painted the approved shade of beige. I didn't want to tell you. You already have enough to carry." My throat tightened. "You're not a burden, you're my mother. And if they think they can bully us into silence, they picked the wrong family." That's when I noticed it, the black sedan parked across the street, its engine idled exhaust ghosting into the morning air. The windows were tinted too dark to see inside, but I felt eyes on us. Watching. Recording. My gut twisted with questions. Was this Karen's spy, or someone else entirely? I grabbed my phone again, snapping photos of the car. Whoever they weren't hiding well enough. The rest of that day blurred into research, phone calls, and frustration. Every lawyer I contacted told me the same thing. HOAs had sweeping authority and cases against them were notoriously difficult. They write the contracts to be deliberately vague, one paralegal explained. Fighting them is expensive, usually futile, but my anger wouldn't let me quit. I combed through the bylaws, late into the night pages of legal jargon designed to confuse, until my eyes caught on a phrase buried in subsection 12, "The association reserves the right to take necessary measures to ensure compliance." Necessary measures. 2 words broad enough to excuse anything, even chains. By the time I stumbled away from the desk, another email pinged my inbox. Notice of adicional violations. My mother had been fined $5,000 for wheelchair track damage to the lawn and $500 for unauthorized removal of enforcement restraints. My hands trembled as I scrolled. This was harassment by paper, a strategy to drown us in debts until we broke. When I told Mom, her eyes filled with shame, not anger. "I should never have moved here," she whispered. "I thought it would be peaceful a place to grow old." Instead, I knelt beside her, gripping her hand. "Number, this isn't your fault, and we're not alone." Because deep down I knew the truth. If they were bold enough to chain her in daylight, we weren't their first victims, and I would prove it. That night, the black sedan was still there. Its engine purred like a predator, waiting for the right moment to strike. But for the first time, instead of fear, I felt resolve. If someone was watching us, then maybe, just maybe, they were also watching Karen. And if that was true, this wasn't just about one cruel HOA president. This was about something bigger. Something rotten buried beneath Cedar Ridge Reserve. I tightened my grip on the camera, the documents, and my mother's trembling hand. Whatever storm was coming, we weren't running. Because I had already decided if they wanted a war, I'd bring one straight to their doorstep. The morning after the chaining incident, I woke up with the weight of everything pressing against my chest. Sleep had been fitful, broken by the sound of phantom chains rattling in my ears. Mom was already in the kitchen when I stumbled in, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She looked smaller somehow, though she'd once been the strongest person I knew. Max, her service dog, rested faithfully at her side, his eyes trained on her, as if he too sensed the shift in the air. She gave me a weary smile. "Marcus, you don't have to carry this. I've been dealing with their harassment for months now. I can manage." Her words cracked something in me. "Months," I repeated, my voice rising. "Why didn't you tell me?" Mom hesitated. Her fingers, knotted with arthritis, tapped against her mug. It started small. Complaints about Max barking. Then fines for the ramp color. "I thought it was easier not to bother you. You work so hard already." I knelt beside her chair, gripping her hand. "Don't you dare call this easier. They've been targeting you, Mom. And if they think they can keep pushing, they're about to find out what happens when they pick the wrong fight." That's when a knock sounded at the back door. Cautious, I peered through the curtain and found Mrs. Rodriguez standing there, her gray hair tucked under a scarf, eyes darting nervously up and down the street. She clutched something in her hand. When I opened the door, she whispered, "Be careful. Karen has ears everywhere." Then she pressed a small USB drive into my palm. "You didn't get this from me." Confused, I ushered her inside. She refused coffee, refused to sit. I've seen what Karen and her people do at night. Moving trash cans, spying through windows, tampering with mailboxes. I recorded some of it, but if she finds out I gave this to you— Her voice broke. "She'll come for me too." I nodded, heart racing. "I'll protect you. Thank you." The moment she left, I rushed to my computer and plugged in the drive. Dozens of video clips filled the screen. One showed Karen's son dragging a neighbor's garbage bins into the driveway at 3 a.m. Another captured two board members photographing homes, scribbling notes. In one, Karen herself appeared snapping pictures of Mrs. Rodriguez's mailbox like it was a crime scene. I watched clip after clip until a pattern began to form. Every target had one thing in common. They had either questioned Karen's authority or belonged to a vulnerable group, disabled elderly minorities. I called my best friend Lena Park, a paralegal who'd bailed me out of trouble more than once. She arrived within the hour, laptop in tow, her sharp eyes scanning the HOA bylaws I'd printed out. "Look at this," she muttered, highlighting a section buried in fine print. "Article 12, Paragraph 4. The association reserves the right to take necessary measures to ensure compliance with community standards." That's deliberately vague. Too vague. "Vague enough to justify chains?" I asked bitterly. "Not legally," she replied, "but it gives them cover to intimidate, and most people won't challenge it because they can't afford to." I clenched my fists. "They picked the wrong family this time," Lena smirked. "That's the spirit. But we'll need more than righteous anger. We need evidence that connects Karen to something bigger than petty fines." Almost on cue, Mom wheeled into the room, her expression grave. "There's that car again," she said, nodding toward the window. I followed her gaze. The same black sedan sat across the street, engine humming, windows tinted too dark. This time I noticed a faint glint, like a camera lens, catching the light before the window rolled up again. "How long has it been there?" I asked. "About 2 weeks," Mom said quietly. "Right after I filed that complaint." "What complaint?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "At the last meeting, I noticed discrepancies in the HOA's financial reports. Payments labeled landscaping were identical to bills I'd seen delivered to Karen's personal residence. I filed a formal complaint. The pieces clicked together so fast my head spun. So this isn't about porch violations. She chained you up because you threatened her money. Mom's silence was confirmation enough. The next day, things escalated. When I rolled our garbage bins back from the curb, I found them deliberately positioned to block Mom's wheelchair ramp. A note taped to one read: bins must be stored out of sight, $200 fine for non-compliance. My blood boiled. I moved the bins and was about to rip the note to shreds when a voice whispered, "I saw who did it." I turned to find Mrs. Rodriguez again, her face pale. It was Karen's son. Around 3 a.m., "I have footage." "Why are you whispering?" I asked. Her eyes darted nervously. "Because Karen has eyes everywhere. She evicted the Patels last month for hanging prayer flags. Said it was an unapproved exterior decoration. That wasn't about flags. It was about their religion." My jaw clenched. "That's discrimination." She nodded, slipping another USB into my hand. "Be careful." Then she hurried away. Inside, I plugged it in and nearly staggered at what I found. The videos showed more than harassment, they showed coordination. Meetings in garages late at night, Karen directing people like a general orders barked to her son and other board members. "This is organized," Lena said, her voice sharp with realization. "Not just harassment. It's systemic." We spread the clips across the timeline we'd already built. Patterns leapt out: residents fined until they sold their homes, properties bought up cheap by a company tied to Karen's maiden name, Aldridge Development. Within months, the houses were flipped for triple the price. "This isn't HOA enforcement," I muttered. "It's racketeering." My phone buzzed with an email notification. Subject line: Emergency HOA Meeting. Disciplinary action required. The body listed my mother by name, resident Ruth Hale, multiple violations. I looked at Mom. She wasn't trembling anymore. Her back was straight, her eyes clear. "Let them try," she said. "I didn't survive 3 tours in Afghanistan to be bullied by a suburban tyrant." Her words filled me with a resolve I hadn't known I was missing. Whatever storm was gathering, we were ready. The night before the so-called emergency HOA meeting, I spread every file, every screenshot, and every USB video across our dining table. It looked like a war map: dates scrawled in the margins, red arrows connecting names, dollar amounts, circled until the paper nearly tore. Lena sat across from me, her laptop glowing with spreadsheets. Mom wheeled herself up to the edge, her face set with the same grim determination I'd seen in old photographs from her army days. Max, sensing the tension, paced restlessly beneath the table. "This isn't random harassment," I said, tapping the timeline we'd built. "It's a pattern. Every single family they've targeted either spoke up about Karen's spending or had someone elderly, disabled, or vulnerable. And every one of those homes eventually got bought by Aldridge Development." Lena clicked through another file. "And here's the kicker. Aldridge Development is registered under Karen's brother-in-law, but the payments funnel back to her personal account. She's hiding behind family names." Mom's voice cut through the silence. "This is racketeering. I've seen operations like this before overseas. You weaken the target, bleed them financially, then take what you want." Her words made the hair rise on my arms. "But this isn't some battlefield," I argued. She fixed me with a stare. "Every battlefield looks different. Some have sand and gunfire. Some have cul-de-sacs and HOA contracts. But the tactics are the same: intimidation, isolation, and control." I swallowed hard. "So tomorrow, when Karen parades her slideshow of violations, what do we do?" Mom leaned forward, her voice steady. "We fight in the open. You bring up the federal laws, ADA, FHA, and force her hand. We document everything, and we make sure the entire neighborhood sees her for what she..." Island Lena smirked. "And if she tries to silence you, well, I'll be there taking notes." But even as we planned, that black sedan still sat across the street, its engine humming. I caught glimpses of movement behind the tinted glass, maybe a camera lens, maybe just paranoia. Either way, it wasn't going anywhere. Whoever was inside, they weren't watching Karen tonight, they were watching us. The next day, the community center buzzed like a hornet's nest. Rows of folding chairs filled with neighbors, some whispering nervously, others clutching printed agendas. Karen stood at the front, perfectly coiffed, a projector casting her carefully prepared slideshow on the wall. Each slide was a petty violation: photographs of grass slightly too long, a bird feeder hanging without approval, a supposed misuse of handicap parking. "Ladies and gentlemen," Karen's voice rang out, dripping with self-satisfaction, "Resident Ruth Hale has accumulated over $10,000 in fines. In accordance with Section 12, Paragraph 4, we must consider foreclosure proceedings. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I shot to my feet. This is harassment, plain and simple. None of these so-called violations override federal protections. The Fair Housing Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act make it illegal to target someone because of their disability. Karen's eyes narrowed. Sit down, Marcus. You're not a homeowner. You have no voice here. Before I could respond, a voice came from the back of the room. But I do. Every head turned. It was Mr. Lawrence, a quiet man who'd lived next door for years. One by one, other voices rose. Mrs. Rodriguez, the Jamal family, even old Mr. Gwynn, who rarely left his house. They spoke of how Mom had helped them over the years, fixing fences, bringing meals, watching kids. Karen's face reddened as murmurs of support grew louder. She slammed her gavel against the table. Order, order in this meeting. The tension was electric, and then the doors swung open. A man in a dark suit entered his presence, commanding silence. He scanned the room, his eyes locking on Karen and then on us. Calmly, he took a seat in the back. Don't stop on my account, he said. Karen faltered for the first time. Who are you? Just a concerned citizen, he replied smoothly, pulling out a notebook. The board members shifted uncomfortably, the power dynamic tilting. The vote was called, and to Karen's shock, 2 members broke rank and sided with us. Her perfect control was cracking. After the meeting, as the crowd spilled into the parking lot, the suited man approached. He handed Mom a plain white card with nothing but a phone number. If things escalate, call this. You're not alone. Then he walked away before we could ask another question. But Karen wasn't finished. When we reached our car, deep scratches scarred the paint, the word leave carved across the driver's side. The black sedan that had lingered for days was gone, replaced by an emptiness that felt even more menacing. Later that night, as I sorted through the USB files again, my stomach dropped. Buried in the property records was proof that 6 homes, all previously owned by disabled residents, had been bought up by Aldridge Development in the last year alone. I stared at Mom asleep in her chair, Max curled protectively at her feet. This wasn't about grass height or bird feeders. This was about silencing her, punishing her for noticing the money trail. Tomorrow, I promised myself we would stop being prey. Tomorrow, we'd start building a case strong enough to bring the whole corrupt system crashing down. Because this wasn't just about our porch anymore. It was about Cedar Ridge Reserve. It was about every family who'd been forced out, every voice that had been silenced. And if Karen thought she could win with fear, she had no idea what was coming. The air inside the community center felt thick, almost electric, as the HOA meeting rolled on. Karen Aldridge's slideshow had sputtered to an end, but she still clutched the gavel like a weapon. Her manicured fingers drummed against the wood, as if daring anyone to challenge her. I could feel the weight of every eye in the room pressing down on me, half of them silently urging me to sit, the other half clinging to a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would finally push back. Mom sat tall in her wheelchair beside me, her chin raised in quiet defiance. She hadn't spoken yet, but her very presence was a reminder that this wasn't about grass length or garbage bins. This was about dignity. This was about survival. Karen's voice rang out again, dripping with scorn. The board will now vote on whether foreclosure proceedings should commence against Mrs. Ruth Hale for chronic violations. Before you vote, I said, my voice cutting through the murmurs, let's be clear. None of these so-called violations would hold up against federal law. The Americans with Disabilities Act explicitly protects the rights of residents like my mother. The Fair Housing Act forbids discriminatory practices based on disability. And chaining someone to their porch, that isn't a violation. That's a crime, false imprisonment under state statute. A hush fell. Some neighbors looked away, unwilling to meet my eyes, but others, Mrs. Rodriguez, the Jamals, nodded subtly. They knew. Karen sneered. Big words, Marcus. But this isn't a courtroom. This is our community, and our community has rules. That doesn't make you above the law, I shot back. She slammed the gavel. Order, you're out of line. And that's when the suited man from the back of the room spoke again. Actually, he's not. Every head turned. He rose slowly, his presence commanding. By state law, any HOA regulation in conflict with federal protections is null and void. I'd advise the board to consider that before they vote. Karen's lips twitched. Who are you to interfere in HOA business? The man smiled faintly. Let's just say I have an interest in seeing fair housing practices upheld. He pulled a pen from his pocket, scribbled something on his notebook, and sat back down as if he hadn't just rattled the queen bee's hive. The vote proceeded anyway, but Karen's perfect control had slipped. 2 board members broke rank and voted against her motion. The tally wasn't enough to clear us entirely, but it was a fracture in her wall of power. She banged her gavel, furiously adjourned the meeting, and stormed out with her son trailing behind. The rest of us spilled into the cool night air. Neighbors whispered in clusters, some offering quiet nods of encouragement as Mom and I passed. I noticed, though, that the suited man had vanished, leaving only a plain white card tucked into Mom's lap. One phone number. No name, no explanation. Back at the car, my stomach dropped. Someone had keyed the driver's side, gouging deep letters into the paint, "Leave." Mom reached out her hand, trembling, not with fear but with anger. They think they can scare us off. They don't know who they're dealing with. I swallowed hard, fury rising like bile. Then we stop reacting. We go on offense. That night, we spread the documents across the dining table again. Lena joined us, her laptop, open eyes gleaming with determination. The USB drives Mrs. Rodriguez had given me played in rotation, frame by frame. We cataloged every incident, every face, every timestamp. By midnight, a disturbing pattern had crystallized. 6 homes, 6 families with elderly or disabled members, each fined into oblivion, each forced to sell, and each property purchased by Aldridge Development flipped within months for triple the value. "This is more than harassment," Lena muttered. "This is fraud, racketeering. If we can connect Karen directly to the purchases, we'll have her." Mom leaned back, her expression grim. "This is bigger than Karen. People like her don't build schemes like this alone. She has help board members, maybe even people outside the HOA. I rubbed my temples. And that sedan. Whoever's been watching us, are they her spies or someone else entirely? As if to answer, headlights swept across the window. I bolted upright, heart pounding, but it wasn't the sedan. It was Mrs. Rodriguez again, holding a flashlight, her expression pale. "They're escalating," she whispered when I opened the door. "I saw them near the power lines behind your house. Karen's son and 2 other men. I think they're trying to cut them." My blood ran cold. "Did you record it?" She nodded, handing me her phone. Grainy but clear 3 figures in HOA jackets, tools in hand, severing cables. Lena swore under her breath. "That's utility tampering. That's a felony." Before we could say more, a crash from the living room made us all jump. We rushed in to find a brick lying among shattered glass, a note taped to it, "Final warning." Mom wheeled forward, her voice like steel. "No more defense. It's time to strike back." I looked at her, at the fire in her eyes, and realized this wasn't the same woman who had trembled under a blanket 2 nights ago. This was the veteran, the strategist, the fighter. "Tomorrow," I said, gripping the brick, "we go public. We take this beyond HOA politics. If Karen wants a war, she'll get one, and this time the whole world will be watching." That night, sleep was impossible. The house hummed with tension, every creak of the floorboards sounding like footsteps, every gust of wind rattling the windows like chains. The black sedan returned, parking once again across the street. But this time, instead of shrinking from it, I stared straight into the tinted glass. I wanted whoever was inside to see me, to know that I wasn't afraid anymore, because the next move would be ours. The next morning dawned gray and heavy, as if the sky itself knew what was coming. I stood on the porch with a mug of coffee, staring across the street at the black sedan still parked in the same spot. Its engine idled softly, a predator waiting for its prey to make the wrong move. Mom wheeled up beside me, Max close at her feet. She wore her army cap, the brim shading her eyes. It wasn't just a hat, it was armor. "Today we hit back," she said simply. I nodded, public and loud. Our plan was straightforward: expose Karen to the one thing she couldn't control: sunlight. I'd called a local news station the night before, feeding them just enough to spark their interest: video proof of an HOA president harassing disabled residents. They promised to send a crew by midday. Lena arrived, first, arms full of folders. "I've drafted formal complaints to the State Housing Authority and the Attorney General's office," she said, spreading documents across the table. "But paperwork takes time. The media will cut through faster." By noon, the rumble of a news van echoed down the cul-de-sac. The neighbors peeked out from behind curtains as the camera crew set up on the sidewalk. Karen appeared almost instantly, storming down her driveway in designer heels, her son trailing behind like an obedient shadow. "This is private property," she barked. "You can't film without HOA approval." The reporter barely flinched. "Public street. First Amendment. We're well within our rights." I stepped forward, heart pounding but voice steady. "We have evidence, video documents, witness testimony proving systematic harassment and discrimination against vulnerable residents." I held up the USB drives, flashing them for the camera. Karen's face twisted. "This is defamation. I'll sue you into bankruptcy." Lena called from behind me, her voice sharp as a blade. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation, Karen, and we've got the truth. The cameras rolled as Karen lost control, her voice rising into shrill hysteria about property values and unfit neighbors. Meanwhile, we calmly presented the evidence, the video of her son cutting power lines, the note tied to the brick, the financial records tying her to Aldridge Development. That night we watched the segment air on a generator-powered TV. Our house was still dark, our power sabotaged, but the glow of the screen was brighter than any light I'd seen in weeks. Karen looked unhinged, ranting on camera, while we came across as steady, reasonable, and most importantly, truthful. Within hours, our phones exploded. Messages poured in from other neighborhoods' families, describing eerily similar experiences. A Muslim family fined for Ramadan decorations. A man cited for using a cane without architectural approval. An elderly couple threatened with foreclosure over a wheelchair ramp. Mom leaned forward, her eyes alight. We need to organize. If this is happening here, it's happening everywhere. By midnight, we'd created a Facebook group, Cedar Ridge Survivors. Within hours, 50 members joined. By dawn, the number had doubled. Each story was worse than the last, a chorus of voices finally breaking through the silence Karen had built. The retaliation was swift. The following morning, a locksmith arrived at our door, tools in hand. Orders from the HOA, he explained, avoiding eye contact. Foreclosure proceedings? I've been instructed to change the locks. They can't foreclose that fast, I protested. He shifted uncomfortably. Emergency powers clause. It's in your bylaws. Lena was already on the phone, her voice sharp as she spoke to legal aid. They need a court order, she hissed, motioning for me to stall. Mom wheeled forward, her voice firm. Son, this is illegal eviction. If you touch that lock, you'll be part of it. You don't want that trouble. The locksmith hesitated, sweat beading on his forehead. Finally, he packed up his kit. I don't want any part of this, he muttered before hurrying away. From the sidewalk, Karen stood with arms crossed, fury radiating off her like heat. For once she didn't smile. That afternoon, the black sedan returned, parked closer than ever. Something inside me snapped. I grabbed my jacket and strode across the street, my pulse hammering. I banged on the tinted glass. Hey, I know you're watching us. Who are you? Why are you here? For a long moment, silence. Then the window lowered an inch, revealing only a shadowed outline. A deep voice spoke. Step back, please. No, I snarled. Tell me why you're watching my mother. For her protection, the voice replied. A hand emerged, gloved, pointing toward our mailbox. Check it. Then the window rolled up again. Confused, I yanked open the mailbox. Inside was a manila envelope with no postage. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were photographs of Karen shaking hands with known criminals' bank statements, showing massive cash withdrawals, and a sticky note with 3 words, "We're building a case." By the time I looked up, the sedan was gone. That night, our Facebook group exploded with activity. Someone leaked internal HOA emails, subject line, Operation Clean Sweep. The messages outlined a chilling plan: systematically remove undesirable elements from the community, elderly, disabled minorities, under the guise of preserving property values. Mom's hand clenched into a fist. This proves conspiracy. This isn't just harassment. This is organized discrimination. The next day, we organized a protest. Dozens of residents gathered on the street carrying handmade signs, HOA equals harassment organization, people over property, justice for Ruth. Karen predictably called the police. When Officer Dyer, her cousin, arrived, Karen's smirk returned, but to everyone's surprise, he looked uneasy. He scanned the crowd, the cameras, the reporters who'd shown up after the television segment. This is a legal assembly, he told Karen flatly. I can't remove them without cause. Her jaw dropped. I'm your family. And I'm a sworn officer, he shot back. The law comes first. The crowd erupted in cheers. For the first time, Karen's mask cracked completely. She screamed at the cameras, her face twisted with rage, but the more she yelled, the more unhinged she looked. Above us, the thrum of helicopter blades filled the air. A news chopper circled its camera, trained on the scene below. Our story had gone viral. That evening, as we regrouped at home, Mom's phone rang. She answered, her face hardening as she listened. When she hung up, she looked at me with eyes that had seen war and weren't afraid of it. That was the man from the card, she said. Federal courthouse. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Bring everything. I felt a surge of fear and exhilaration all at once. Who is he? Her voice was steady, someone who's been waiting for Karen to make a mistake. And she just made the biggest one yet. The morning we stepped into the federal courthouse, the whole world felt sharper, like every sound, every detail had been dialed up to full volume. The marble floors echoed beneath my shoes as I pushed Mom's wheelchair forward, the wheels squeaking slightly with each turn. She sat ramrod straight, her army cap pulled low, a folder of neatly labeled documents balanced on her lap. Her eyes were calm, but I knew the storm she carried inside. Lena walked on my other side, her laptop bag heavy with evidence, screenshots, USB drives, property records, photos of vandalism and harassment. We weren't just neighbors fighting a petty HOA anymore. We were plaintiffs carrying a case that could topple an empire. A marshal led us into a side conference room where a man in a tailored dark suit waited. He stood as we entered, extending his hand to Mom, first not me. That single gesture told me everything. He knew exactly who the warrior in the room was. "Mrs. Hale," he said with a firm nod. "Special Agent Min Nguyen, FBI. And this is my partner, Agent Torres." Torres, a tall woman with keen eyes, gave a curt nod. "We've been monitoring Cedar Ridge for several months. What you've brought us confirms our suspicions." I froze. "So you were the ones in the sedan?" Nguyen allowed the faintest smile. "Observation only. We couldn't intervene until we had evidence of physical abuse. When Karen chained your mother, she handed us the leverage we needed." Mom's voice cut through the room like a knife. "So you watched me chained like an animal and did nothing." Torres leaned forward, her tone steady but respectful. "We had agents ready to move in if the situation escalated. But your son freed you quickly, and your calm under pressure prevented anyone from being hurt further. It gave us exactly what we needed, proof that Karen's authority crossed into criminal territory." I clenched my fists. "So what now? You arrest her?" Nguyen shook his head. "Not yet. Our goal isn't just Karen, it's the entire network. These operations rarely happen in isolation. HOAs across multiple states have been infiltrated and used as tools of organized fraud. If we move too early, the bigger players scatter. We want them all." He gestured toward the files in Mom's lap. "But with your cooperation, we can turn Cedar Ridge into a controlled environment. We run a sting, collect every shred of evidence, and dismantle their operation from the inside." Mom's eyes narrowed. "You want to use my home as bait." Nguyen met her stare without blinking. "We want to use your home as a command center. With your consent." I was ready to explode. "She's already been through hell, and you want to put her at more risk." Mom raised a hand, silencing me. Her voice was calm, but her eyes burned. "Marcus, this is my fight as much as theirs. They tried to break me. Instead, they reminded me who I am." She turned back to Nguyen. "You have your command center, but I'm not just a bystander. I want in." Within hours, our house transformed into something unrecognizable. Agents carried in black cases filled with equipment cameras, no bigger than buttons, laptops, humming with encrypted programs, wires snaking discreetly along the walls. Our spare bedroom became a surveillance hub, screens flickering with live feeds from hidden cameras around the property. Mom wheeled into the room and immediately began directing placement like she'd never left the service. "Camera there," she ordered, pointing to a bookshelf angled at the front door. "It'll catch anyone approaching with their head down." Torres raised a brow. "You've done this before." 20 years in Army intelligence," Mom said simply, her lips curving in the faintest smile. "You don't forget how to set a perimeter." By dusk, everything was in place. The bait had been chosen carefully. A rumor seeded through our survivors group that Mom had discovered a second set of financial records hidden in her old military footlocker. To sell it, we staged photos of me wheeling the trunk into the garage, padlocked and bolted shut. The waiting was the hardest part. Hours stretched like days. Every creak of the house felt amplified, every gust of wind rattled the windows like warning knocks. The black sedan parked outside, again silent and watchful. But now I felt no fear. If they were watching, then so were we. At 1:03 a.m., the monitors lit up. A figure slipped along the fence line, moving with the cautious gait of someone who thought they were invisible. My pulse hammered. "Target approaching," Torres murmured into her mic. We watched as the man crept into the garage, his gloved hands fumbling with lockpicks. The trunk gleamed under the single bulb bait waiting to be bitten. Nguyen's voice was steady. Hold, now." The door burst open, agents flooding in. FBI hands in the air, the intruder froze, dropping the tools with a metallic clatter. My stomach dropped as the hood was yanked back. "Tom Reynolds," I whispered. "A board member. One of Karen's most loyal lackeys." Under interrogation, Tom crumbled fast. Sweat poured down his temples as he spilled everything Karen paid him to plant violations, to move garbage bins, to file false reports. He admitted that the harassment wasn't random, it was targeted. Vulnerable families were deliberately crushed under fines until they sold. Then Aldridge Development swooped in, and the real records, new and pressed. Tom's voice shook. Box 307, First National Bank. That's where Karen keeps everything. Bribes forged documents, the payoff accounts. But only she can access it. Wynn dialed his phone immediately. Judge, we need a warrant. Urgent. By dawn, agents had cracked the box. What they found was staggering. 15 years of ledgers, payment schedules, contracts signed under duress. Names of board members, shell companies tied across state lines, bribes documented with meticulous pride. This isn't just Karen Aldridge, Torres muttered, flipping through the files. This is interstate fraud, racketeering, civil rights violations on a massive scale. I sat back dizzy with both triumph and dread. We'd finally uncovered the heart of the machine, but exposing it meant we were deeper in the line of fire than ever before. Mom wheeled closer, her voice quiet but unshakable. They thought they could bury us under chains and fines. They didn't realize they were giving us the shovels to dig their graves. As the first light of dawn spilled across Cedar Ridge, I looked at her and realized something profound. They hadn't created a victim. They'd resurrected a soldier. The war wasn't over, but for the first time I believed we might actually win it. Cedar Ridge was no longer just a quiet suburban development. By the end of that week, it looked and sounded like a protest zone. Every street corner carried the hum of tension, the rattle of handmade signs, and the low thrum of news vans circling like vultures. On Saturday morning, I wheeled Mom onto the porch. She wore her army jacket over her usual sweater, the medals still pinned proudly to the chest. They want to fight in the open now, she said, scanning the crowd gathering near the community center. Good. Let's meet them there. I hesitated, but she didn't give me a chance to argue. Neighbors began filing past carrying signs they had painted themselves. Justice for Ruth, stop, HOA abuse, people over property. Kids clutched poster boards scrawled with crayon messages, don't hurt my grandma, let us play outside. Across the street, Karen's loyalists assembled. Their signs were glossy printed, professionally paid for with HOA funds, no doubt. They shouted slogans about preserving property values and keeping standards high. At their front stood Karen's son, his jaw tight, his voice leading the chants. The two groups faced off in the middle of Cedar Ridge Drive, the shouting escalating until it sounded like a battlefield. And then, without hesitation, Mom wheeled herself straight into the gap between them. Mom, I shouted, trying to grab the chair, but she raised a hand like a commander, silencing her troops. The crowd stilled. Even Karen's people faltered. This has gone far enough. Mom's voice cut through the noise, sharper than the megaphones. This isn't about property values. This is about humanity. For a moment, silence. Then one of Karen's staunchest supporters, Tom Wilson, wearing a Save Our Neighborhood shirt, stepped forward. Humanity, he sneered. You people are ruining everything. My home's value is down 30% because of all this drama. Mom looked him straight in the eye. Tom, do you remember last spring when your daughter came to my house for her Girl Scout badge? She taught me about planting roses. That garden still blooms outside my porch. Do you really think chains on a veteran's wrists are what keep your home safe? Or do you think good neighbors standing together are what make a community strong? Tom blinked, caught off guard. His voice faltered. She pressed on. I spent 20 years in the Army protecting the rights of every American. That includes you, Tom. But when did we decide dignity was negotiable? When did decency become optional? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Phones lifted recording. Some of Karen's supporters lowered their signs, shame flickering across their faces. Mrs. Peterson's voice rose next. Karen fined me $3,000 because my husband needed a wheelchair ramp after his stroke. She said it was an eyesore. The Jamals stepped forward. She called our Ramadan lanterns garbage. She told us we didn't belong in her neighborhood. More voices joined each story, a stone hurled at Karen's crumbling wall. Each word stripped away her illusion of power. Tom Wilson stared at Mom, then at the neighbors around him. Slowly, he pulled off his Save Our Neighborhood shirt, crumpled it in his fists, and crossed the line to stand beside us. I didn't know, he said quietly. I'm sorry. That broke the dam. One after another, Karen's supporters defected until only a small knot of diehards remained. Their chants sounded hollow, lost in the rising swell of voices united against them. Above us, helicopter blades thundered. Not just news choppers this time, 2 federal birds circled their cameras glinting in the Sunday. The world wasn't just watching Cedar Ridge anymore. The world was judging it. That evening, hashtags like #Justice for Ruth and #HOA abuse trended nationally. Our Facebook group swelled to tens of thousands of members, families across the country sharing their own HOA horror stories. Patterns emerged: fraud, harassment, discrimination stretching far beyond our neighborhood. But Karen was not finished. At 3 a.m., I woke to Max barking wildly at the window. Flames licked the sky in the distance. The community center was burning. By the time fire trucks arrived, the building was engulfed, the roof collapsing in showers of sparks. Neighbors stood in pajamas, some crying, some filming, all terrified. "That's where we stored the evidence," I gasped. Agent Torres appeared beside us, her expression grim but steady. "Don't worry. We backed up everything on federal servers." Karen doesn't know that. She wanted to erase the record, but instead she just added arson to her charges. Still, the damage was done. Fear rippled through Cedar Ridge again. Families who had finally spoken up now packed their cars, too spooked to stay. 2 houses stood empty by sunrise. Notes slipped under doors, read, "You're next." Tires were slashed. Pets vanished. Cameras mysteriously failed. Karen might be gone, but her shadow still stalked us. That evening, Mom gathered us in the living room. Her voice was low, steady. "We can't just defend ourselves anymore. We have to draw her out." I frowned. How she tapped her notebook pages full of observations and sketches. "She's unraveling. Desperate people make mistakes. We give her a target too tempting to resist." Sarah, our young paralegal ally, leaned forward. "What if we announce that we've uncovered something new, something Karen doesn't know we already have backed up?" Nguyen considered it, rubbing his jaw. "Risky. But it might flush her out." So we baited the trap. I posted on our survivors group, found a second set of records in Mom's old military footlocker, turning them over to FBI tomorrow. We staged photos, Mom and I wheeling the trunk into the garage padlock gleaming in the light. Cameras hidden by the agents captured every angle. The neighborhood held its breath. At 2:17 a.m., the feeds came alive. A figure crept through the yard, hood pulled low. He slipped into the garage, crouched by the trunk, tools glinting in his hands. "Now," Nguyen ordered. Agents swarmed. FBI hands in the air. The intruder dropped his tools, hands raised. My heart dropped when the hood was yanked back. "David," I gasped. Karen's husband. His face was pale, his eyes hollow. "Please," he stammered. "She made me do it." Karen's been watching everyone through hidden cameras. She's not done. She said she's coming back with one more surprise. Nguyen's jaw tightened. "Where is she?" David's shoulders slumped. "Canada. Fake passport. But she swore she'd return. She said she won't leave until she destroys every one of you." The room went cold. Because if there was one truth we'd learned about Karen Aldridge, it was this: she never surrendered quietly. The morning of Karen's official sentencing hearing arrived, cloaked in unease. Even though she had fled across the border weeks earlier, her absence did nothing to quiet the storm. The courthouse steps were packed with reporters, camera crews jostling for angles, neighbors clutching signs that demanded accountability. Mom sat tall in her wheelchair beside me, her uniform jacket gleaming in the sunlight. She hadn't worn it in years, but today she wanted the world to see her not as a victim but as the soldier she had always been. Inside, the courtroom buzzed like a hive. The judge, presiding over the case, stern and deliberate, shuffled through files as if weighing centuries of injustice on his shoulders. David Aldridge, pale and trembling, sat in the defendant's chair, awaiting his own sentence for conspiracy and obstruction. But the empty seat where Karen should have been was the real focus of every lens in the room. The prosecution laid out the evidence we'd fought to gather: the property records, the USB drives of harassment, the tampered power lines, the arson of the community center. Each piece stacked higher and higher until it looked less like paperwork and more like a tower built to crush the Aldridges under its weight. Then came the curveball. Karen's lawyer stood, briefcase trembling in his hand. "Your Honor," he began, his voice brittle. "My client, though absent, has filed a countersuit against the plaintiffs and the residents of Cedar Ridge, claiming defamation, harassment, and conspiracy to damage her reputation." A ripple of disbelief shot through the courtroom. I wanted to leap out of my seat. Defamation. She had chained my mother, destroyed evidence, terrorized families, and now she dared to claim we had wronged her. The judge's face hardened. "This lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice," he declared, his gavel cracking the silence. "Furthermore, given the severity of these crimes, I am issuing a bench warrant for the immediate arrest of Karen Aldridge, freezing all her assets and authorizing federal agencies to seize records related to her company." Applause erupted, restrained only by the bailiff's warning glare. Mom's shoulders eased for the first time in weeks. She reached for my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "One chain broken," she whispered. The real break came 2 weeks later. Canadian Border Patrol caught her trying to slip back across with a forged passport. By the time she was dragged into the same courthouse she had mocked, she was no longer the queen of Cedar Ridge. She was a criminal in shackles, her designer clothes traded for prison gray. Cameras flashed as she spat curses, claiming she was protecting property values and fighting for America's future. The judge listened patiently before delivering the sentence: 15 years in federal prison, plus restitution to every family she had harmed. The gasp that followed wasn't shock, it was relief. Karen's reign was over. But the story didn't end with her conviction. With Karen gone, Cedar Ridge voted in a new board, transparent, compassionate, determined to rebuild. Funds were redirected to repair accessible ramps, rebuild the burned community center, and create spaces where everyone felt welcome. Neighbors once divided by fear now shared meals at block parties, children playing freely on lawns once patrolled by Karen's enforcers. The FBI widened their investigation. What began in our cul-de-sac spread across the state, then across the country. HOAs in 16 communities were exposed for the same fraudulent schemes, targeting vulnerable families, forcing them out, flipping properties for profit. My mother, once chained to her own porch, now testified before Congress, her story shaking the room. Her voice carried the authority of both a soldier and a survivor, demanding new protections against HOA abuse. 1 year later, Cedar Ridge held its first Unity Festival. The air smelled of barbecue, kids chased balloons, and the new community garden, complete with ramps, wide paths, and raised beds, flourished with color. Mom sat at the center of it all, not as a victim, but as the neighborhood's elected HOA president. People came to her with questions, not out of fear, but trust. Agent Nguyen visited that day, shaking my hand firmly. "Your mother did more than survive, Marcus. She started a movement." I looked at her, surrounded by smiling neighbors, her laughter ringing out like it hadn't in years. He was right. She hadn't just fought back, she had lit a fire that no one could put out. Of course, Karen still tried. Letters came from prison, ranting about conspiracies and betrayal. But instead of frightening us, we used them as teaching tools in workshops about HOA reform. Her words, once weapons, had become examples of what unchecked power could do to a person. As the sun dipped below the rooftops that evening, I realized something profound. The chains Karen used to bind my mother hadn't broken us. They had forged us into neighbors who stood together, into a community that chose compassion over control, into a family stronger than fear. Sometimes I thought the darkest acts spark the brightest transformations. And in Cedar Ridge, the fire of one woman's cruelty had been turned into a beacon of justice for thousands. Life has a way of testing us in the moments we least expect. My mother could have given up that day on the porch, humiliated and broken by steel links meant to silence her. But instead, she chose to fight with courage, with evidence, with truth. And in doing so, she reminded me, and everyone watching, that dignity is never something another person can take away. Communities only survive when people stand together against fear, when compassion outweighs control, and when courage refuses to bow to intimidation. If you've ever felt powerless in your own neighborhood, remember, this one voice can light the spark that changes everything. Drop a comment below. Have you faced an HOA or a neighbor who abused their power? And don't forget to subscribe to hear more stories like this, because together we're building a community no one can tear apart.